Siphamandla Goge, like Ropiwa said, he is at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, where these heads of states are arriving in South Africa for the BRICS summit. Now, the Russian delegation landed earlier at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, and this, of course, while the Indian Prime Minister is expected to touch down later. Let me try and see if I can get hold of our senior reporter, Siphamandla Goge, who is monitoring those arrivals. Siphamandla, if you can hear me, who has arrived and who else can we expect maybe from the other African countries, the heads of state there that will be arriving today as well?
We expect the arrival of the Indian Prime Minister, which will be the last country in terms of BRICS membership. Yesterday, the president of Brazil touched down. Already yesterday evening, just before midnight, the president of the People's Republic of China touched down too. He is busy with his state visit at the Union buildings. South Africa and China have got comprehensive relations in terms of trade and politics. It's not only about politics and trade, but people-to-people movement. South Africa and China enjoy cordial relations. Those relations are being enhanced. Those cooperations are being strengthened as we speak here at Waterkloof Air Force Base in Union buildings. The president of China and the president of South Africa are having those engagements. The South African delegation and the Chinese delegation is huge. If you check the portfolios of South African ministers that are there, you can see that that engagement is solely on the basis of one thing and one thing only: trade. Look at this BRICS summit in the context of trade. Yes, many people mistaken this BRICS bloc as a political institution or setup, but initially when it was conceptualized, it was mainly the alternative of the emerging economies at the time. Of course, it has since grown, but it's purely an economics bloc that is dealing with what can be done to ensure that there is alternative in challenging the global status quo. The Western superpowers will not be pleased with the developments that have taken place in the BRICS bloc in terms of what is happening. A number of countries have shown interest in joining. Here at Waterkloof at Waterkloof Air Base, we expect the arrival of Indian Prime Minister, and then after that, two key strategic countries that have got comprehensive and cordial relations with South Africa: Cuba and Tanzania. In the African context, if you look at Tanzania and strong historical ties with South Africa and enhanced cooperation in terms of trade of late, and how Tanzania in that region is becoming one of the emerging powerful countries in terms of trade and politics in the region, you get a sense that there is a lot more that is taking place behind the scenes. President Ramaphosa announcing that more than 30 heads of state in Africa alone have been invited. South Africa chairing this BRICS summit would want to make this an African summit that is inclusive, that is accommodative of other African countries, because we do not operate in isolation. There are other African countries led by the African Union that would want to be part of this. And South Africa is saying, as we go along this journey, we want to take the African continent with us. So after the arrival of Indian Prime Minister, just after 1:30 this afternoon, later there will be Cuba and Tanzania, and all of those will participate in the summit as invited guests. But on the sidelines, you get a sense that there will be too many bilateral engagements that will be taking place between a number of countries, including South Africa as the host.
And of course, Siphamandla, you mentioned, Africa playing a pivotal role in this BRICS summit, hence the theme. I just want to remind our viewers as well that the theme this year, BRICS and Africa, partnerships for mutually accelerated growth, sustainable development, and of course, inclusive multilateralism. And you mentioned, it is important. It's not just, the BRICS nations that will be in all of these discussions. It will be the other African countries as well. That is very important for this BRICS summit to also realize, isn't it?
It is important if you take into account that in Africa, South Africa is regarded as the gateway to the African continent. But yes, there are a number of African countries that have shown resilience in terms of their economies. But also, whatever you do, remember here, as this is about trade and economics, but it's global, regional, continental, and domestic politics at play. You've got these powerful countries meeting in South Africa. They are countries from the Middle East, from other continents that have shown interest in joining BRICS. And those countries are emerging economies in their regions. Now you've got the well-established, global superpowers in the form of the United States of America and the European Union countries that have, in a way, or I would say they are paying attention to what is happening with BRICS because it will challenge their status quo. So you have global politics at play, but the gist of this summit is about trade. So a number of African countries that are coming to this summit would want to see what's in it for them in terms of becoming part of this powerful bloc, which is BRICS, of course led by South Africa in the continent, to say, please come along, get your seat, join us here. This is the table. How can we move forward together to ensure that no matter what happens, Africa as a continent develops? Because there is one common interest here. You can't have South Africa developing alone in terms of trade without the rest of the continent. No matter what happens, you need to move as a bloc, you need to move as a group, so that you will have political and economic power to negotiate for whatever influence you would want to have in other global bodies such as your United Nations, for instance, if you are talking about global politics. But in terms of the economy and trade, if you move with one direction, you have too much economic power to negotiate, and you can achieve a lot as a continent. Because remember, this is purely about trade, and Africa would want to get a lot. There is the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement that is in place, and Africa as a continent would want to exploit that, trading with other BRICS member states and partners, and also other countries which are invited guests here, because on the sidelines there will be too many engagements between countries trying to see what opportunities are there in terms of investment, infrastructure, energy, transportation, logistics, but all of that is underpinned under one category: trade.
Thank you so much, eNCA senior reporter Siphamandla Goge. He is at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, of course, just keeping a close watch on those arrivals of different heads of state, not just BRICS members, but the other countries, African heads of state as well, including the Cuban president, also expected to arrive today, Indian Prime Minister to arrive later this afternoon, and of course the official BRICS summit kickstarting at 4 p.m. Very important that Siphamandla said that we need to know that this BRICS summit is about trade. That is the main focus. And also, of course, when we take a look at the state visit from President of China, Xi Jinping, trade is definitely one of the main things that will be discussed between President Ramaphosa and the President of China. And something important that we mentioned earlier as well is that it is important for South Africa to use this platform to promote ourselves as an export partner, not just to the BRICS nations, but especially to China, and to grow our exports in a way as well, so that we can also be enhancing our trade in that regard.